All right, so good morning. We are going to be talking today about the inspection contingency, which is one of the most confusing and exciting contingencies of the entire transaction. So first, I'm going to explain just the contingency in general. I'm going to be sharing my screen. We're going to be looking at the contracts themselves. We're going to look at actual examples of both an inspection amendment and a notice of defects. We're also going to be learning all about the condition report and then a step-by-step structure of how to really manage the inspection contingency in a way where both the buyer and the seller feel really comfortable and both feel like they've won in a sense. So with the inspection contingency, essentially the purpose of it is for the buyer to have a licensed inspector to come in, look at the property, and see things that maybe we as agents or the clients may not initially see. And the idea is to learn about the property, get a great to-do list of things that the new buyer is going to be working on with their home for the time that they own it, and also uncover major defects and safety issues, which, according to the contingency, should be fixed prior to the closing. It's important to note that the way an inspection goes from start to finish is really, really on the agent. I've seen inspections make transactions fall apart, and a lot of the times it's because the agent did not handle it correctly or set expectations. So where do you set these expectations? The buyer consult is a great place to start because that's where you're really talking about the transaction in whole. Keep in mind, though, that things you talk about in the buyer consult tend to be forgotten a little bit. So you'll want to remind them throughout the transaction about the inspection and what we're going to be looking for. The main expectation to set is that we are not looking to nitpick or tear the house apart. Now, of course, there's some inspections that have a lot on them, but there's no such thing as a pass or a fail. Nothing drives me crazier when I hear, oh, the inspection passed, or oh, the inspection failed. No such thing. It doesn't exist. You're not going to get a report that says fail with a big X on it or a green check mark. That's not the way it works. It's a negotiation, and it's really about what's important to the buyer and what's important to the seller and what's attainable and what's not. And we'll get more into what that means. But first, set expectations about the inspection itself, what to expect at the inspection and what we're even looking for. I always encourage buyers to follow the inspector around to learn. This is a learning opportunity. When else are you going to get to walk side by side with an expert of a home and teach you all about where things are? Even small things like they're going to show you where the main water shutoffs are, where the furnace is, where the water heater is, the ages of them. Those are all important things to know when you're owning a home. How are the gutters? How are the downspouts? How's the grading around the house? All these things, you literally have somebody who's an expert walking with you and teaching you all about the home. So again, not pass or fail, more really a learning experience and diving into the home to learn about it. What we're looking for are major defects, right? Major defects are things that are such a large defect that one would either pay less or not have bought the home to begin with if they had known about it. So this can be something like every single window in the home needs to be replaced. It could be that the roof has a hole in it. It could be that the roof was installed incorrectly from the beginning. It could be that the basement is moving 2 inches out of plumb and continues to move, right? If the basement isn't continuing to move, may not be a big issue. But again, that's all up to the inspector and a structural engineer if you need to get those experts in. So it's all about deep diving, doing your homework, learning about the property, getting experts in where they need to, because inspectors know a little bit about everything, but they don't know a lot about very specific items. So very commonly, an inspector will say, I recommend that we get an electrician here to look at the wiring of the home because it looks a little off to me. So one thing I always want to keep in mind when we talk about writing up amendments or negotiating the inspection is that we want to do all of our homework in advance so we know what we're asking for. And we'll dive deeper into that. So first, let's learn a little bit about expectations and what to expect. So This document is in the coaching drive. Everyone is welcome to it. If you want a copy of it, just let me know. But just top tips to begin. Let the buyer know that the inspection is going to be about 3 hours. That's important to note, because if you don't, after an hour or so, they might be thinking, oh my gosh, this is going really long. It must be going really badly. No, it's normal to be about 3 hours. It's important to know that too, just for their schedule's sake, that they can't just do this on their lunch hour. It is going to take a little bit of time because the inspector is looking at every aspect of the home, top to bottom, inside and out, minus things like outbuildings and pools. You do need specialists for those. When you're at the inspection, less is more. And what I mean by that is, don't be silent and just walk around with nothing because you're so afraid to say anything, but do not give advice or expert opinions. You are not an inspector. You are not an electrician. You are not a plumber. You are not a foundation expert. Very, very commonly, we will feel like we want to contribute, right? We're here. We want to be a part of it. We want to contribute. But a lot of times I have seen this happen. Agents say things that are out of line, such as, that foundation wall looks fine, or this is a huge issue and it isn't, or, oh, the lot line must be over here. Buyers remember that. And now who are they going to be upset with, or who are they going to come back to if that thing isn't true? So if something looks okay to you, don't say anything. Get the inspector over there and get their expert opinion on it. You don't want to lead the buyer in a wrong direction. You also don't want to scare them if it truly isn't a big issue. So always defer to the experts and don't put yourself in a position where you're talking about things that you're not an expert in. You are an expert in real estate negotiations, the market, not inspections. Choose inspectors who don't scare buyers. So what I mean by this is, work with inspectors who are real, can talk to your buyer like a person. Don't use way over your technical terms. Interview your inspectors, get to know them. That way you're always working with somebody that you trust and you know is good at their job, right? You don't want somebody who goes, oh my gosh, this is such an issue, but you want people to say, okay, this is an issue. Here's how we fix it, or here's what we're really looking at. It's a lot more enjoyable for a buyer to use the inspection as a learning experience versus here's red flags all over the place. So you want a professional, they need to be licensed per the contract, and you want somebody who's going to make your buyer feel comfortable. Don't focus on deferred maintenance. We talked a little bit about this. We're focusing on major defects and safety issues. Like I said, the rest is an awesome to-do list for you to work on throughout the time that you own a home. You are buying a used home. That's a script. I use this all the time. You are buying a used home, not a brand new home. Very rarely will we ever walk into a used home, a home that's not brand new, and not have issues. There's always something. Think about your own home. There's probably things that need to be fixed. That's normal. We're not going after the seller or wanting to walk away from a transaction because of a leaky sink. We are focusing on major defects and safety issues. Remember that it is not you versus the other agent. It is not buyer versus seller. It is not you versus anybody. Everybody is on the same team. You and the listing agent are working together to make the transaction a win-win for everybody. What this means is that even when things get really crazy, one of the first things I do after the inspection, especially if there's things that came up, let's say we had the inspection and the inspector said, okay, well, you really need to get a foundation specialist out here, because they'll kind of summarize it at the end because you go over a lot, and he'll kind of give you the key points that you need to get an expert in. There is a part of the contract that says you are entitled to get experts in after the inspection if the inspector recommends it. We're going to read the inspection contingency to verify that, because we trust but verify. But you do not need to get permission or write up any sort of contract to get your expert in there. All you need to do is schedule it so that seller obviously knows that you're coming, and communicate with the listing agent so they can let them know. So here's kind of what that conversation would look like. Let's say I just had an inspection and we learned that the roof from day one was installed incorrectly. Okay. it's shot, it's at the end of its life, it's not correct, there's missing things. Let's say literally roof is shot. Even if it is at the end of its life and, isn't correct, the inspector will still recommend a roofer because only a roofer knows exactly the way that it needs to be fixed. So we're walking away from this, let's say, and leaving the inspection. You're not going to go ahead and just write up an amendment that says seller to replace roof and inspection contingency is waived. No, no, no. You still have to get a roofer out there and you need to have a conversation about it. Inspection negotiations should never, ever, ever happen without a phone call. It is so much easier to have this as a phone call. So here's what this would look like. I call up the listing agent. Hi, listing agent. Okay, so we just had the inspection, went well, buyer, really enjoyed themselves. They're looking forward to making this their home. I just want to let you know that there was something that came up that we're going to take a look at. It's the roof. Yeah, the roof. So we learned that it's at the end of its life and looks like it needs to be replaced. So what I'm going to do right away is get a roofer out there. He's a roofer I use all the time. I really trust him. Of course, if sellers want to get a second opinion as well, let me know. But we're going to get a roofer out there next Tuesday at 3 p.m. to take a look. So for now, I'll hang tight. I'll let you know how everything goes. And I'm confident we can make something work here. So it's a positive conversation, right? We're not going in and saying roof is shot, we're walking away. No. The conversation with the buyer really looks as well like this. Hey, I know that it probably sounds scary that the roof is shot, but hey, here's the good thing. Every roof has the end of its life, right? Homes are used. Everything has an end of its life when it comes to a home. Mechanicals, roof, all of it, right? At some point, everything needs to be replaced. So how awesome is it that we learned it now while we're in negotiations? So we may actually be able to get the seller to contribute or pay for this. And it didn't happen to you in 5 years when it's all on you. This is great news. And at the end of the day, here's how it works. You have the right to cure, which means we're going to ask the seller to do the work necessary, which we'll learn from the roofer what that necessary work is. If the seller says no and refuses to do anything and is not willing to touch it, you are entitled to walk away using your contingency, and technically your earnest money is due back to you per the contract. Right there, now for the buyer, it's a win-win situation. It's not scary. It's a good thing. It's good that I always use the explanation that it's good that it's happening right now and not when you own the home later when it's all on you. You got nothing else. It's just you. Right now, you still have an opportunity to negotiate these things, which is why we have the inspection. This is the time where we learn what's going on and what major defects are happening. So with that, we now have had a good conversation with listing agent and we've had a good conversation with buyer. Now we all go together, myself, the buyer, the roofer, and we look at the roof. Sometimes the seller wants to be there. Sometimes the listing agent wants to be there, but they definitely don't need to. So what I have here as well is just a helpful step-by-step kind of structure for what you do after you have the inspection. So when you have that conversation with the listing agent, you also want to email over that inspection report right over to the listing agent immediately when you get it. There's no sense in holding it back or hiding it. The seller is entitled to it anyway, and we're going to see that when we read the inspection contingency. I also like to give seller a little bit of time to digest the report before they know everything that we're asking for. So this way, they're not getting a notice of defects / amendment and the report at the same time where it's like, bam, bam, bam. Now what's seller's natural reaction going to be? They're going to be upset. They're going to be mad. They're going to be surprised. They're going to say this inspector's a quack. So this way, it kind of gives them some time to look into it. And sometimes you'll find that the seller even has experts come out themselves right away to begin looking at it, because some sellers, most sellers, hopefully, want to make sure that they're giving the buyer a good product, a good, safe home, right? Not every seller is going to be that way, but it's definitely always, always, always in everyone's best interest to get that report over to the listing agent immediately before you do anything else. So sometimes it takes about 24 hours to receive. That's okay. You may have already talked to the listing agent by then, so they kind of know what's on it, but there might be some more items as well. I always like to prep the buyer to go over and read the report at a certain time. So I usually like to get that over to the buyer right away as well. Normally, the inspector will send it to you as the agent and the buyer. I send it over and say, hey, read this over together. You know, if it's a couple or one person, read it over and let me know when you have time, 30 minutes to do a call or a Zoom call or a meeting if necessary, and talk about this and our game plan. So normally in like a day or two, we get together either on Zoom or a call. That's usually the easiest way to do it. Go over the report. And I always ask the buyer, in this report, here's the things that stand out to me, as your agent, these are the things that stand out to me. But at the end of the day, you tell me what's important to you, right? What stands out to me might be that all of the outlets are, have reverse polarity or something like that. And for me, that's something maybe I, as a buyer, would want corrected. Maybe your buyer is an electrician or knows an electrician and goes, oh yeah, that's really not a big deal to me. Maybe we could get a small credit out of it and then I could just have it fixed myself or, have my buddy fix it. So you never know what's important to a buyer until you ask. So you always say, hey, we're going to talk about what's important to you here, but I'm also going to share what I would think is important as well, because they want that. They always want guidance. Buyers definitely will ask you, most likely, what do you think? Are you comfortable with this? And I'll give my opinion because I do have a fiduciary duty to the buyer with buyer agency to always work in their best interest. So I'm going to tell them the things that maybe alarm me or that in my experience, I would want fixed, and maybe what is more of a deferred maintenance item. So as you're newer and still learning the ropes about inspection contingency, always work with your broker or team leader on navigating the inspection, because it will take time and transactions for you to learn what's normal and what's not. And it is always a negotiation. Things are very rarely black and white when it comes to an inspection. So you want to be careful and just make sure that you're covering all your bases and protecting your client, which is the number one priority. Then you're going to schedule secondary inspection. So sometimes this happens right away. Sometimes it's after you have a conversation, but sometimes you'll have a conversation and the buyer will go, you know what, those plumbing issues really concern me. We would like to get a plumber in. Then you're going to schedule the specialist that you need. Right away, I like to schedule it through showing time as well, once I have it scheduled with the expert, just so seller and listing agent are aware that we are coming in. When you are newer, I've had this happen to many a student. I've had some listing agents bully a new agent because they know they're a new agent and require them to get permission or write up an amendment saying that, hey, you need to write up an amendment to get permission to have this plumber come in. No, you don't. Per the contract, you don't. And we're going to read that in a minute. You are completely entitled to secondary inspections per the WV11 offer to purchase. You're going to call the listing agent as well. Maybe, and again, this list might not be totally chronological. You might actually call the agent right away. You might wait. I always like to give them a quick call after the inspection because as a listing agent, I'm dying to know what happened and wondering. So I always like to give that listing agent peace of mind either way. But then you may have another conversation now that you know what maybe those 4 items are that everyone is going to be looking at. Maybe it's the furnace. Maybe there's a gas leak at the water heater. Maybe they're having somebody also come out and look at the plumbing. Maybe there's some dripping areas in multiple areas where they're not draining properly. So maybe there's a deeper issue. So again, you're not an inspector, so you can't say what's a big deal or not. But if the inspector recommends an expert come in, now you know someone further probably needs to look at this. Now that you've done your homework and you've learned a little bit, let's say you have a quote from a plumber that says, okay, these 15 things need to be fixed, or these 4 things, whatever it may be. Maybe you've gotten your quote from a roofer, let's say, for a full tear off and replacement of the roof. You're going to talk through with the buyer and discuss how you're going to draft up your amendment. An amendment is a negotiation. So I want to talk deadlines for a bit too and go backwards here, because I get the comment a lot, oh, I delivered the report on this date, or I delivered my amendment on this date, or my amendment expires on this date. None of that matters. None of it. It does not matter when you deliver the inspection. It does not matter when you have the inspection. It does not matter when you deliver the amendment. And what I mean by that, it matters, but it doesn't matter in regards to the inspection contingency deadline. The inspection contingency deadline is typically, let's say, 7 to 14 days after accepted offer. It does not change unless you change it. So when we read the inspection contingency, we'll look at that, but just keep in mind, it does not change unless you change it. So all dates and deadlines run from the date of accepted offer. You know immediately when the offer is accepted, when all your dates and deadlines are, when you send out your dates and deadlines document to your client after accepted offer, or after your transaction coordinator sends that information for you. So even if your amendment expires, it doesn't matter, but you need to make sure that you're doing all this negotiating prior to the deadline. Because if the deadline passes, none of this matters anymore. You have zero rights under the inspection contingency, and your buyer has now accepted the home as is. Not a good place to be. That's why, again, when you're in the coaching program, we watch your dates and deadlines to make sure they're not missed. But when you are not in the program, and if you don't have a transaction coordinator watching over these dates for you, you need to make sure you are watching these dates like a hawk, because if they pass, and there's nothing you can do to get them back. There's few things more heartbreaking than watching a buyer agent let an inspection contingency deadline pass, because now they've done a huge disservice to their buyer. So now you're ready to draft your amendment, which means you're essentially writing a proposal for what the buyer would be okay with having done. And in return, they will waive the inspection contingency and make it all go away. The contingency itself is over, okay? Here's how I like to begin my amendments, and we're gonna look at an example. Seller agrees at seller's expense to complete the following no later than 7 days, 5 days, or 3 days, doesn't really matter. I like 7 days, prior to closing, with all lien waivers. A lien waiver is essentially the contractor waiving the lien, saying that it's paid for and nothing else is owed. Invoices, I just like a copy of the invoice to show what work was done. And receipts, paid receipts, provided to buyer upon completion. Upon acceptance by all parties, the home inspection contingency, as outlined on lines blank through blank, shall be waived. So here's why it should be outlined. On lines blank through blank should be waived. The reason I have the lines there is sometimes the offer to purchase changes or adjusts, and I like to make sure that this, is a lifetime document, then we don't need to change the lines. We'll look at that contingency in a moment though. With this kind of gives you an overview of what we're looking at, and why do we want to be specific about which inspection contingency? Well, the reason is because sometimes there's multiple. If you have a well inspection contingency, or a septic inspection contingency, or a pool inspection contingency, or something specific, I have seen this happen, which is why I have this written this way. I have seen a buyer agent write, upon acceptance by all parties, the home inspection contingencies shall be waived. Well, when we had this happen, what do you think happened? Well, the septic inspection wasn't done yet, but when negotiating the home inspection, they waived all inspections. What do you think that means if something happened with the septic and it did not pass? Septic is one thing, that's pass fail. Well is pass fail, which is really nice. Those are in more rural areas. What do you think happened? Well, the seller looked at this and said, you already waived all your inspection contingencies. So you need to be very careful and only waive the home inspection contingency, the one we are talking about. Then I like to detail out in a really clean way what items are being fixed. I also like to make sure that I'm saying that seller is retaining a licensed blank electrician, plumber, HVAC person, so that it's very clear what we're asking for. Keep in mind, you can ask for anything in an amendment. Remember, it's a proposal, it's a negotiation. You're trying to amend something in the offer. If the seller rejects it though, and you end up having to do a notice of defects, AKA a demand letter, then it defers back to the way it needs to be fixed from the offer to purchase. There's nothing in the offer to purchase saying that the people need to be licensed. The defects just need to be cured. The scary thing about that is that technically a seller can cure a defect in many different ways, and sometimes, most of the time, don't always choose the best people or contractors for the work because they're trying to do it as inexpensively as possible, right? So we always want to try to get things negotiated through the amendment if we can. If we have to do a notice of defects, and we'll talk about that in a second, it really comes down to what the buyer's intent is with the notice of defects, and we'll look at one in a moment. Once you have the amendment all filled out, you're going to call the listing agent and discuss, hey, I just want to let you know that I just sent over an inspection amendment. There's a lot on there, so I totally understand if you have questions, please review it with your seller and give me a call when and if you have questions. Again, I know we're going to be able to work something out, so let me know if you have questions and I'll talk to you soon, kind of thing. So again, keep it very positive. I really like the script. I know that we'll be able to put this together or make this happen or work something out. That way, you're not coming at it from a very angry perspective. As a listing agent, I have definitely gotten the phone calls that say, well, if you don't fix it, we're going to walk away. I've definitely had the conversation with a listing agent as the buyer agent. Yep, well, seller's not doing anything. And let me know if you want to send over a camera. I've gotten that plenty of times. A camera is a cancellation and mutual release. I always like to give them the comment, well, I'm sorry, it's really not me and you negotiating here. It's us working on behalf of our clients. And I don't think you've had time to talk to your seller yet. So once you speak with them and get their thoughts, then let me know. I say that in the nicest way possible. My point in that is sometimes the listing agent speaks on behalf of the seller and gets like a big bulldog type bark right away. And you just want to make sure you don't go to their level or argue with them, and just continue to say, once you have spoken with the seller, please let me know. That way you get actually what the seller wants to do, because very rarely is the seller saying, yeah, send over a cancellation. We're not fixing anything. A lot of times they're getting that information from their agent. So when I said earlier that sometimes it's the agents who make transactions fall apart, not the clients, it's moments like that. So it's important to stay positive and logical and objective. You're definitely going to get times where the seller goes, oh, well, they're not fixing that roof. They're not replacing it. They're not going to be doing anything. And I've definitely seen it happen where a seller accepts the amendment. So again, it's between the buyer and the seller. The agents are just negotiating on their best behalf. And it is always, always in your best interest to over communicate, stay positive, and stay objective. Objectivity really allows you to focus more on the issue, not me versus you, you're raising your voice, I'm not, kind of thing. Just remain objective, remain in the transaction, stay transactional. Do not meet them where they're at if they're starting to get angry or rude. And unfortunately, everyone's human and it happens. So you just want to make sure that you are always working in a way that you're protecting your client the best. So let's take an example of an inspection amendment. So when we look at this here, we're going to take a peek at this and say, okay, buyer and seller agree. This is an amendment. This is what you're standardly going to use anytime you're amending anything on a contract, a closing date, a date change, a clerical error. You're going to use this amendment a lot. So buyer and seller agreed to amend the offer dated this date and accepted this date at 123 Main Street. Maybe we're not changing anything on closing date. Maybe we're not changing anything on purchase price. The reason these are here are these are just the two most commonly changed items in an amendment. So they're there, but you do not need to put anything in the fields. Actually, don't put anything in the fields if you're not changing closing date or purchase price. Here's our language we looked at before. Seller shall complete the following no later than 7 days prior to closing with all lien waivers, invoices, and receipts submitted to buyer upon completion. Upon acceptance by all parties, the inspection contingency as outlined on lines 193 through 226 shall be waived. Great. So what are we doing? 1, seller shall have the foundation repaired by XYZ foundation specialist as outlined on the attached estimate. Number 1, 2, 3, 4. We're attaching an estimate because if we're asking for work to be done, it means we have had to already have had the quote done and know exactly what we're asking for. That way, seller doesn't just go fix it any way that they want to, right? The buyer's making it clear, I want this done, I want it done by these people, and I want this particular quote followed. Seller to retain XYZ asbestos specialist to complete asbestos remediation in the basement as outlined on estimate number 5. So you're actually sending these PDFs along with it and attaching. Where do you attach them? You attach them right here. Estimate from XYZ Foundation, XYZ asbestos specialist. So you're attaching on line 28 of the amendment those documents. Seller shall retain a window specialist to replace the east kitchen window to match the rest of the windows in the home. So you always want to be specific. They're replacing a window, which window, right? So you need to be very specific about what you're asking for. Seller to retain a licensed electrician to correct the double tap in the electrical panel and ensure there is 1 breaker per space. Seller shall retain a licensed HVAC specialist to do a service on the AC and furnace and replace or repair as recommended. So that's one where it can kind of be a little bit open. You may want to get an HVAC specialist out there beforehand, but if it's just something where the inspector is like, hey, you may want to have this looked at, but it's working just fine, might not be a huge issue. As a listing agent, I would never accept this amendment because this is totally buyer centric, right? We're getting the best possible work done because buyers are going to choose the best contractors to do the work. I'm kind of citing a blank check a little bit here on number 5. I don't know if I'm repairing or replacing. First, I'm going to get an HVAC specialist out there before I sign this bad boy, because I want to find out what I'm even walking into, right? So as a buyer agent, though, I'm always writing the amendment on behalf of the buyer, right? I know that the seller, this is not in the seller's best interest. This is in the buyer's best interest. And what I mean by that is the seller might want to do a little more homework, or maybe they want their own contractor to do the foundation and asbestos work because they found somebody cheaper and more economical or something like that. So keep in mind, this might not be accepted. If it's accepted, great. But I always set that expectation, remember, with the buyer, hey, we are writing this totally buyer centric in your best interest. It's not uncommon for us to get an amendment back with what they are willing to do. Remember, this is a negotiation. We're still in the negotiating world, okay? So now we put a deadline on this. We wait. The deadline might pass. Not a big deal. It has nothing to do with the contingency, okay? Let's say seller's being feisty and says, you know what? We're not touching anything. We're not doing anything to the home. Take your amendment and you know what they'll say. So what do? Well, before the inspection deadline is up, now we need to pull out the big guns and write up a notice of defects, okay? A notice of defects is more like a demand, not a suggestion. So what I mean by that is now we are saying, these are the items that are an issue. Seller either fixes them or we walk away. Now we're not negotiating anymore. This is no longer, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that, maybe we'll do this in this way. Now we're demanding these items be fixed. With a notice of defects, you are outlining the defects, not the repair. Okay, so you're saying what the actual defect is in the home inspection, not what the recommended repair is. So that's why it's always better to do this in an amendment if you can, but sometimes you just get a seller who is not willing. I always ask the buyer, what is your intent here? What does the seller need to fix for you to stay in this transaction? What would those items be? Okay. And let's say it's these 6 items. Now we're going, and I will say, if the seller accepts this notice, we are in the transaction and we move forward. Okay. So I say that because you want to make sure you are really truly putting everything the buyer would want in this notice of defects, because if the seller accepts it, you move forward in the transaction and they have to fix those items. If the buyer says, I am no longer interested in this home, no matter what they do, I don't want it. I hate this home. I have a bad juju, bad feelings about it. I don't want it anymore. What do? Well, we always tell them that there is a risk that the seller could accept the notice of defects completely. So in order to de-incentivize them from doing that, we want to put as many things as possible in that notice. The conversation I usually have with the listing agent is, hey, I know there's a lot on this notice of defects. I understand if they don't want to do it all. I'm going to send a cancellation and mutual release over in addition to this. At the end of the day, though, the seller can accept it. And I have had sellers with principal go in, accept the notice of defects, and fix all, let's say, 20 things on it, even though they are aware the buyer's intent is to walk away. I always like to say, you really don't want to force someone to buy a home. As a seller, does that feel good that you forced the buyer to buy the home? I'm aware that legally, yes, they're contractually obligated to move forward with the transaction and could be sued if they don't. But at the end of the day, it doesn't feel good to force a buyer to buy a home. That's just my opinion. But I've talked to the buyers, let's say, and these 6 things are the things that they're like, you know what, if all 6 of these things get fixed, we'd love that. We would still buy the home. Great. We'll put it on a notice of defects. Now we say, this is a notice of defects. Buyer objects to the following. 1, there's a hole in the roof. Okay. So the fix is, you don't get to choose if the fix is a new roof or a patch. What's the seller most likely going to do? Well, probably a patch. They're probably not going to do a full tear off this unless they're like the kindest sellers in the world. They are objecting to defects in the plumbing system. The main lateral drain has roots growing in it and the drains are not draining into the home. That could be a big issue. So they're going to have it scoped most likely and cleaned out and hopefully not replaced. But if they do, more power to the buyers. There's exposed wiring in the attic. There's knob and tube wiring as the main source of power to the home. It's not up to current municipal building code, so the fix is probably a replacement of the electrical system. Defects in the foundation. West wall is 2 inches out of plumb. Okay, and again, you might still have all these estimates and further inspections with this. You just don't get to say that that's who they have to use. But as the buyer, you have more information, which is good, because technically now the seller needs to disclose to all future buyers these newly known defects. So I always tell the listing agent, hey, if you don't fix it for us, you might just have to fix it for someone else. So you might as well, you've got a bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush. You might as well move forward with us, because now you're going to need to disclose this to everybody else now that the seller is aware that the foundation is out of plumb. The next buyer might very well ask you to do it as well. So why not get it done here? Firewall is non-existent between the garage and the house. With a notice, you have now issued your notice. It's been delivered, let's say, to the listing agent. You're going to attach the inspection report by XYZ home inspectors, because in order to satisfy the inspection contingency, you need to attach the inspection to the notice of defects. And now you wait. How much time do you have? Well, you have as much time as you had put in the offer to purchase to get this back. What I like about the notice of defects is, let's say it's 10 p.m. on the night of your inspection deadline. When you send your notice of defects, a new time clock begins, which is great because now you've protected the buyer. That's why a notice of defects is always like a last ditch effort. You're typically not going to just send over a notice of defects immediately after an inspection. You're going to try and negotiate with an amendment first before you send over what I call pulling out the big guns. You do this typically the day of the deadline if you're not getting anywhere with the seller. So let's read the inspection contingency so we have a good understanding. Now we've kind of learned how to navigate it. What does the contingency even say? Well, going backwards, now you're going to know kind of what we were talking about with some of this. The contingency only authorizes inspections, not testing. Testing is very specific, okay? It defers you to other lines, 178. So this gives you the difference between inspections. So buyer may only conduct inspections or test if specific contingencies are included as a part of this offer. Well, we're going to specifically do the inspection contingency. If they want a very specific test, they need to ask for it. And a good place to do that is in Addendum A. There's a testing box there if you really want let's say a mold test. An inspection is an on-site inspection. You're taking something and you're looking at it on site. A test is, let's say you have a well, taking a sample and taking it to a lab and testing it. That is a test. So there's a difference between the two, and you want to be aware of that. Okay. You can't just get a test if you don't ask for it. Inspection just authorizes the inspection that you're asking for. Having a home inspection does not give you a well or a septic inspection. Those are also separate on Addendum A. And when we do Addendum Alphabet, we'll dive more into what those contingencies look like. So as we talked about, an inspection is defined as an observation of the property, which does not include an appraisal or testing of the property other than testing for leaking carbon monoxide or testing for leaking LP gas or natural gas used as fuel, which is hereby authorized. What that means is that during the inspection, the inspector usually has a little gas tester, making sure in the home there's no leaking gas. That's okay to do. A test is defined as taking samples of materials such as soils, water, air, or building materials, like asbestos floor, for example, from the property for laboratory or other analysis of these materials. Seller agrees to allow buyers, inspectors, testers, and appraisers reasonable access to the property upon advance notice if necessary to satisfy the contingencies. AKA, if you have an inspection contingency in your offer and seller accepted it, they cannot lock the doors and not let them in. That's not an option. It says right here that they authorize them to come in. So if they're trying to get you to not have your inspection, can't happen. Buyers or licensees or both may be present at all inspections and testing. So what that means is that they don't have to be, but they can be. As a buyer agent, you should truly be at all of your buyers' inspections because it really shows a lot of support for them. Remember, it's scary for them. They don't know what's going on. They're nervous. And for you to leave them like that is really not okay. If you can't make it, send another agent on your behalf. It also helps you in the negotiation process because you actually were there and got to talk to the inspector and know what's going on versus just reading the report. Except as otherwise provided, seller's authorization for inspections does not include buyer to conduct testing of the property. Note, it's in bold, right? If it's in bold, you should read it. Any contingency authorizing testing should specify the areas of the property to be tested, the purpose of the test, why are you doing it, and any limitations on buyer's testing and any other material terms of the contingency. Okay, so this whole testing thing, we are very aware now after reading this, you cannot do testing without permission. Buyer agrees to promptly restore the property to its original condition after buyer's inspections and testing are completed unless otherwise agreed to by seller. Buyer agrees to promptly provide copies of all inspection and testing reports to seller. Right there, line 190. Remember when we talked about delivering the inspection report immediately to seller? Right there, it's in the contract. You have to. You do not get to withhold this report from the seller. I get this question a lot, and I refer directly to 190 because the answer is always in the contract. When someone calls me and says, should I send the inspection over? First of all, you weren't paying attention in class. Second of all, read line 190 of the offer to purchase, and your answer will be there. Seller acknowledges that certain inspections or tests may detect environmental pollution, which may be required to be reported to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So it's very rare for that to happen, but sometimes there's certain things that come up that may need to be reported. So again, they're really hammering this one home. This contingency only authorizes inspections, not testing. This offer is contingent upon a Wisconsin registered or Wisconsin licensed home inspector performing a home inspection of the property after the date on line 1 of the offer to purchase. The date on line 1 of the offer to purchase is the date that you're writing the offer. So AKA the inspection has to happen after. You're going to check this box if you want it to be a part of the offer to purchase. This offer is further contingent upon a qualified independent inspector or independent qualified third party performing an inspection of blank. So you can have further inspections if you want to put them in here. Again, this is not where you're going to put well or septic. Those are on Addendum A or another addendum because those tests, the contingencies are pretty long and there's so much protection for them in there. I wouldn't want to put it here. Line 197 is something you want specifically specifically inspected that isn't either a part of the inspection contingency normally, or if you want it inspected no matter what. An example of this is, I'm going to just tell you a story. Many years ago, I was in a showing with a buyer and we went in the basement and the foundation looked horrendous. It literally looked like dirt was coming through the walls. Like you could tell you could pick away at the wall and it would kind of fall. Like it was not a good foundation. We knew we were having an inspection with the home. They still wanted to move forward with an offer because they knew that they had the protection of the inspection contingency. And the buyer was very adamant about using a particular inspector that they knew. I had never met this person before. In the inspection contingency, I wrote the word on line 197, foundation. Why? Because I knew well enough that the inspector was going to recommend a foundation specialist anyway. By putting it on line 197, I didn't need to wait for the inspector to recommend it. I could have it done immediately. Or in the event the inspector does not recommend the secondary foundation inspection, I still am able to have one. That was the best way to protect the buyers. So we go in the basement with the inspector, the normal inspector, and he goes, yeah, I see these kind of basements all the time. I'm not worried about it. And I'm like, what? You need to write this up. This is a disaster. And he wouldn't. He said it was fine. He said these homes in the Milwaukee area, this happens all the time, and wasn't really a concern to him. Well, I promptly scheduled a foundation inspection because I still did not, my ping was going off. I'm like, something is off here. And I called the listing agent and I said, hey, want to let you know that we have a foundation specialist scheduled, next Tuesday, whatever, at this time. And he goes, no, you can't have a foundation inspection. I don't see anything about the foundation in the inspection report. And I said, yes, I know you don't, because the inspector did not recommend a secondary inspection. However, take a look at line 197. I specifically wrote in a foundation inspection. He clearly didn't read the offer that his sellers accepted. And we were able to have a foundation inspection. Long story short, the foundation specialist did not like the basement at all. It was a huge issue, wrote up a report on a fix. It was a huge fix, basically the home needed to be like put on a new foundation. That's how bad it was. That's why normally I wouldn't be such a, worried about something like that, but this was a concern. And that inspector literally would have allowed the buyers to end up with this home without any sort of remedy. So because on line 187, I had the word foundation, we were able to issue a notice of defects. And ultimately the seller said they were not fixing it. I watched the home on MLS for a while. It ended up selling, but they never updated their real estate condition report to show the defects. So I have no idea what happened, but I still remember that agent's name because now I don't trust him. Anyway, that line is for things you want inspected no matter what, even in the event the inspector doesn't recommend a specialist. So you always want to be careful as well, because at the end of the day, the buyer does get to choose the inspector and you don't always get a say. Now, we typically recommend inspectors, but they still have a right to go to whoever they want to. You also could put something like a pool here or an outbuilding or something specific you wanted inspected. Okay. You also could put roof, foundation, and chimney if you know always that you like to have those inspected separately, or if you know they might be an issue. If you're in competition, though, you might not be able to get away with it. In competition, meaning other offers on the table, not just you. Line 200, I have definitely had to refer to this many times with agents who have not read the contract or don't understand. Buyer may have follow-up inspections. These are those secondary inspections we've talked about, recommended in a written report resulting from an authorized inspection, provided they occur prior to the deadline on line 206, which we're going to read in a second. The inspection shall be performed by a qualified independent inspector or independent qualified third party, meaning you can't just go in and say the foundation is messed up. You need a qualified person. Buyer shall order the inspection and be responsible for all costs of the inspection or inspections. Line 204, caution, buyer should provide sufficient time for home inspection and or any specialized inspections, as well as any follow-up inspections. So keep in mind, the deadline you put on line 206, that is your inspection contingency deadline. So 7 days sometimes isn't enough time to get all these people in there and do what you need to do, because I always like to think about, I might have to have secondary inspections as well. You know, sometimes we have just one inspection and it's fine, but a lot of times they want a specialist to come in and really look at a particular item, like a roof, a foundation, plumbing, electrician kind of thing. This contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless buyer within blank days, okay? So 15 is the default. You're never going to let it default. If you want it 15, write 15. If you want it 7, write 7. After acceptance, delivers to seller, okay, a copy of the written inspection report, which we talked about if we issue a notice of defect. So this is saying it's satisfied unless, here's the unless part. Seller delivers a copy of the written inspection report after the date on line 1 and a written notice listing the defects, a notice of defects. So buyer objects to the following and blank. We looked at a copy of that. Identified in those reports to which buyer objects, that notice of defects, okay? 209, this is a good caution. A proposed amendment, like we talked about, is not a notice of defects and will not satisfy the notice requirement. So like I said, when I say I don't care when your amendment expires, this is why. Line 209 says right here, your proposed amendment does not satisfy the contingency. So sending over an amendment at 10 p.m. on the night of your deadline, unless that amendment gets signed by both parties, if it's only signed by buyer and seller didn't send it back and you never submitted a notice of defect, your contingency is over. So that line 209 is really important. A proposed amendment is not a notice of defects. For the purposes of this contingency, defects do not include structural, mechanical, or other conditions, the nature and extent of which buyer had actual knowledge or written notice before signing the offer. What this means is that in the condition report, if it says all the windows in the home are broken, you cannot put on your notice of defects that the windows are broken because you already had knowledge. The notice of defects is for items that you did not know about before. Can you put it on an amendment? Sure, because an amendment is a proposed negotiation. If the seller signs it, fine. You can put on your inspection contingency amendment that the seller needs to paint the house purple. And if they do that, the buyer will waive the inspection contingency. My point in that is that it's a negotiation, and if the seller agrees, you now have a signed amendment. So it doesn't really matter what's on it. That's why it's a negotiation. A defect, as defined on lines 445 to 447, means a condition that would have a significant adverse effect on the value of the property, that would significantly impair the health or safety of future occupants of the property, or that if not repaired, removed, or replaced, would significantly shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the premises. That's a lot, but that's what a defect is, okay? So technically, a leaky sink may not be a huge issue at the moment. However, if not repaired, it could become a bigger issue. So is a leaky sink a defect? Probably, right? And this defect thing sometimes can be agent versus agent saying, this is a defect, this is not a defect. So in the contract, if you read these lines, it explains more in detail what a defect is. But in my opinion, if something gets left unrepaired and is going to cause issues later on, it is a defect per the contract. If not repaired, removed, or replaced, would significantly shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the premises. Sounds like a defect to me. Right to cure. What does this mean? I like the word fix instead of cure. The right to fix it, okay? Seller shall or shall not. It defaults to shall. You would strike one of these if you want them to be shall or shall not. If the seller does not have the right to cure, what it means is that basically when you submitted notice of defects, contract's over. You're not giving the seller the opportunity to fix it. If they have the right to cure, they do have the opportunity to fix it. It depends on the market that we're in. It depends on how negotiating is going. But back when it was more of a buyer's market, we would always say shall not have the right to cure, to give the buyer more power and basically really incentivize that seller to negotiate with the buyer on their amendment, because they knew that the buyer could walk away if they didn't agree to do all of the items. Or yeah, because if they submit a notice of defects, it's just over. There is no negotiation. So it really puts the buyer in the upper hand position when the seller does not have the right to cure. If the seller does have the right to cure, at the end of the day, they know they still have to get a notice of defects and they still can say yes or no to it. So the seller has a little bit more of an upper hand, if that makes sense. If you're in competition though, you may or may not get an offer accepted if you don't have the right to cure, because it's a not fun place for the seller to be in. Basically, you could have a leaky sink and the buyer could send a notice of defects and say, I'm walking away, which is not ideal either. So it says, if seller has the right to cure, this is how the seller satisfies the contingency. They deliver written notice back to the buyer within blank days. Okay, so remember before we asked, when does the notice of defects expire? When a buyer sends over a notice of defects, it defaults to line 218. How many days do they have to get back to you? I like to put a very short amount of days, like 3 in here, because who wants to sit around for 10 days while the seller decides if they're fixing things or not? That seems too long to me. So I like putting in line 218, 3 days. You could put 5, you could put 7, you could put 10, you could put 20. After buyer's delivery of the notice of defects. So buyer issues that notice of defects. Now they have this amount of days on line 218 to get back. They can deliver written notice that they are stating that seller elects to cure the defects. Okay. Line 220, they need to actually cure the defects. So they need to say they're going to, and then they need to actually do it. Here's how they have to do it: in a good and workmanlike manner. Line 220 is really the only area that it says how it needs to get done. It doesn't say licensed professionals. It doesn't say anything about who they have to use. It just needs to be done in a good and workmanlike manner. Can be kind of wishy-washy, I know. Line 221, delivering to buyer. They have to deliver to buyer a written report detailing the work done no later than 3 days prior to closing. Okay. That's how they cure the defects. They have to say they will, they have to do it, and they have to give the reports of what they did. This is only if they get a notice of defects. If you did an amendment, none of this applies. The offer shall be null and void. If the buyer, they have to make timely delivery of the notice of defects, so before the deadline on this timeline, and the written inspection report. Remember, you have to submit that inspection report, and the seller does not have the right to cure. Okay, so that basically means if you don't have the right to cure, seller issues a notice, buyer issues a notice of defects, offer is over. Or if the seller has the right to cure, but they deliver a written notice that they won't cure, or they don't timely deliver the written notice, election to cure. That line's really important to protect the buyer in the event that the buyer submits the notice of defects and then never hears back. Line 226 says the offer is null and void if you don't hear back, because it's not fair for a buyer to be sitting and waiting around for this. And does that happen? Sure, it does happen sometimes, unfortunately. Technically though, without a cancellation and mutual release, releasing everybody from the transaction, you're not technically done with the transaction. I know it says the offer is null and void, but it's something you'd want to consult an attorney with before the buyer goes and gets into an offer to purchase to buy something else. We always like to have that cancellation and mutual release, releasing both parties from the transaction. That's why sometimes with the notice of defects, a cancellation will just be sent right along with it if everybody knows that the buyer wants to walk away. So that is the inspection contingency. This is a nice checklist of how to manage through it. In class 12, we have examples of the inspection amendment and an actual notice of defects. And then we do have a presentation here about the condition report, who has to fill it out, what's important, what's not. Essentially in this presentation, we really talk about what what the condition report really is, who needs to fill one out, and the answer is everyone needs to fill one out. So we'll dive deeper in another class on the actual condition report, but it's something that the seller fills out prior to selling their home. However, per the offer to purchase, it needs to be submitted within 10 days of accepted offer. Normally, though, we just find this document within the MLS documents to provide to the buyer. So if you have any questions, let me know. But that was our inspection contingency 101, how to navigate it and how to manage expectations with your buyers. Have a good day.